What is up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Surfing the Stream. We're on a quest to find out what is the greatest movie of all time. I am Matt Primo, and this week we are starting off Horror in Review Part 4. That's right, the fourth Horror in Review series. The first one was the greatest movies of all time. The second one was the scariest horror movies. Last year was Alien horror movies. And then now this year, we are doing possession slash haunting in review. Super fucking excited, mainly for one thing. And that is because this is my favorite subgenre of horror movies. Okay. I absolutely love possession movies. They're honestly, that's why I love horror more than anything. Although I didn't fall in love with possession movies until like my teens, maybe like early 20s. It was mainly slasher films for the greater portion of like my childhood and my teenage years and stuff like that. But with that being said, I've been super excited to do this series. I told Carmen last year, who is one of our Patreon supporters, she does horror in review with us every single year. And I told her, look, I will do Alien in review this year, but next year I want to do possession slash haunting because it is my favorite subgenre. And I cannot wait to review some of the movies that we have planned for y'all this year. But first up, we have the Amityville horror. This is a movie that I haven't seen in a very long time. So I was excited slash cautious to kind of jump back into this movie. Honestly, I wasn't, I'm not going to sit here and say that it was, oh my God, this is an amazing movie, or I just straight up just disliked the movie back then, because I didn't. I never felt one way or the other about it. It was just one of those watches that you're like, okay, like, it's on TV. It's on with the AMC channel or what was that? Not TBS, TNT, all those fucking TV shows, right? Or the channels, excuse me. And it just comes out on a Saturday night, and you're like, fuck it, man. I'll fucking watch it, you know. And it's kind of like one of those things. It's never something that I just went out of my way to watch. So I really wanted to kind of spend some time watching this movie and reviewing it this year. And then also because our Patreon supporters kind of voted for it. So that's neither here nor there. Okay. But speaking of which, if you want to support us and you want to vote for the things that we record and review each and every week, go to patreon.com/2game. That is the number 2. Click down below if you're on YouTube, Spotify, whatever, the show notes, the description, whatever. We have all of our links to our Patreon, to our merch. We also have links to our social media accounts. Go make sure you like, subscribe, do all that bullshit. We would greatly appreciate it if you do. It really helps the podcast. But also another thing that I want to mention before we jump into this review, this is my first solo video podcast. So up until back in April or May, it was strictly just audio format only, and then we went over to YouTube full-time ish. But I stopped doing solo reviews, and it was strictly with Josh or somebody else, right? So going into this review series, I kind of sat there and I'm like, shit, man, this might be a little bit tougher than I kind of hoped or thought it was going to be, you know. So bear with me. This is going to take some practice, okay? But first up, we're going to be talking about Amityville horror. Let's jump into the plot and the fun facts. So, Amityville horror. Newlyweds are terrorized by demonic forces after moving into a large house that was the site of a grisly mass murder a year before. It was directed by Andrew Douglas, who, for whatever reason, hasn't really directed a movie since. And he had directed some music videos and some TV shows. Weird choice for director. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot others out there that they could have chosen, but whatever. I digress. This movie had a budget of $19 million and it grossed $107.5 million. Pretty decent. It's a pretty decent return. It stars Ryan Reynolds and Melissa George. It has a runtime of 1 hour and 30 minutes, and it was released April 15th, 2005. So one thing I want to mention right off the gate before we jump into the fun facts, they released a horror movie in April. Who thought that was a good idea? Now, granted, you made $107.5 million, so who am I to argue with that decision? But to me, it feels gross when a horror movie is not released around October. I do know that like January, maybe February, horror movies are kind of coming out then, just because they're a little bit slower months in terms of releases, and I don't mind that. But April, May, June, those are like blockbuster type movies. Okay, that's like the Transformers, the superhero movies, the Indiana Jones, those types of movies. Not really horror movies. Now, granted, you're playing to a specific genre and a specific type of people, so I kind of understand. But fun facts, got three of them for y'all. I wouldn't sit here and say they're like super fun, but they're interesting, I guess. Just before shooting began, pun not intended for this, the body of a fisherman who had been murdered washed up on the bank of the river near the main house. Chloe Grace Moretz did most of her own stunts, despite being only 8 years old, and the fact that this was her first time acting. Megan Fox also auditioned for the role of Lisa the babysitter. That would have been interesting. Honestly, I really don't like Megan Fox as an actress. I legitimately hate her as an actress. But the actress that played Lisa in this movie was pretty fucking bad too. So I say just give it to Megan Fox, whatever. But let's jump into my general impressions of the movie. Like I said, this is not a movie that I go to on a regular basis. Like I said, I haven't seen this movie in years. It's probably been 15, 20, not 20 years, not close 20 years, but like 10 or 15 years since I've seen this movie. Okay. This is not a movie that I've just always loved. I've seen it a few times and it's just okay. Like it's a horror movie, right? But I was interested in seeing it through the lens of a review series, and now that that's something I also do feel like I need to mention. Ever since I started the podcast, I look at movies differently now that I'm trying to be more critical of them and whatnot. Back then, guys, I would love every fucking movie, not gonna lie. It was just a matter of, am I getting entertained or not? And I've really kind of grown my movie taste over like the last 3 years. So jumping into this review, I was pretty excited because I mainly wanted to see how the horror elements held up after what, almost 20 years. It's like 18 years. That was the biggest thing that I was cautious about, because that is like from like 2005 up until, hell, I'd go so far as to say in 2013, maybe 2015, somewhere around there. It's just like horror movies just, I'm not going to say they were terrible, because there were some great horror movies released in those years, but they became very cliche. They weren't really doing anything new, and that we're kind of in this new age of horror movies, which is really great. So I was cautious. Like I was like, how is this movie going to turn out? And I gotta say, it's a fine watch. Okay, it's one of those watches that I'm like, I still have the same feelings. If this came on a Saturday night or even a weeknight and I had nothing better to do and it was on TV, then I'd probably watch it. But as far as going out of my way to actively search for this movie and look it up and say, which streaming site is this on, which is on HBO Max, by the way, and then watch it that way, probably not. Would I buy this movie? Probably not either. Like after watching it this time around, it's not something that I'm going to go spend $5, $10+ on. Like, if I could get it for maybe $2, maybe. But honestly, that's kind of just pushing it. Like I said, this movie is fine. Honestly, This is more of a spooky movie than it is a horror movie, in my opinion. I believe wholeheartedly that they do some super cliche things over the course of this movie. And granted, this happened in 2005. So you got to kind of look at it from that perspective of, okay, were other movies kind of doing that at the time? Because of course, now it could be cliche, but back then, not so much. And I still think it's cliche even in 2005 standards. This movie is plagued with jump scares. They try so hard to do jump scares as the main horror element within the movie. And if you've never followed along with our series, our horror and review series, or even listened to the podcast for any length of time, then you know that I am not a huge fan of jump scares. I think they're cheap. I do know that movies like The Conjuring, for to be very specific, they have, or Insidious as well, they do jump scares very, very well, and I'm okay with it because they kind of play with your expectations a little bit. In the Amityville horror, they do not play with those expectations. They kind of treat you like you're an idiot, to be honest with you, and they just do jump scares for the sake of jump scares. And that is probably the biggest issue that I have with the movie in general is this doesn't feel like a horror movie. It feels more like a spooky movie more than anything. And for a rated R movie, they did not utilize the rated R whatsoever. There are some movies out there nowadays that, oh, okay, it's PG-13, but dude, like this shit's fucking scary. They use those PG-13 elements. This one, rated R, and I feel like it was wasted. Like this could have been PG-13. All you had to do was bleep out and change some F words. Like you take out some of those F words, this is a PG-13 movie. And I feel like that's the audience they were kind of going for, but they made it rated R. So tonally, there's some issues there. And speaking of tone, when the babysitter comes in, it's like the entire movie changes tone for probably about what, 10-15 minutes, maybe, however long she's in there. It's like she becomes, it's almost kind of like Rob Zombie started directing the movie for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm not sitting here saying that it is like there are tits hanging out or anything like that, like typical Rob Zombie movies. There's nothing like that. But the tone shifts, and Lisa the babysitter is kind of played a little over the top. And I don't know, it changes dramatically for those 10 to 15 minutes. And then it shifts right back to that spooky horror movie. So personally, I think they should just cut out that entire section. But then you got what? This movie's already an hour and a half long. So I mean, you're looking at about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes. I would have expanded on some of the killings a little bit more. Maybe some of the previous owner kind of expanded on the lore and the world of the Amityville horror rather than just give us them running around a house for an hour and a half and losing their minds, which all in all, I think they did a good job of doing. Like, I think they did a good job of kind of, now, realistically speaking, it was mainly just George, the Ryan Reynolds character. It was mainly him just freaking the hell out and slowly kind of getting possessed and getting kind of succumbing to the evil within that house. But for the most part, I just think there was some tone issues with there, and I would have preferred if they would have explored that world a little bit more. We got 5 minutes of her kind of looking through newspapers, which is so fucking cliche, by the way. Like, I can't stand that they use that. That to me is lazy storytelling when you have to go back and look through newspaper clippings. It is a horror cliche, and I'm not a fan of it. So I would have preferred if they would have bring the priest in a little bit more, let him help you tell that story a little bit better. or even have them go to the jail and talk to the guy that originally killed the family beforehand. Do something different instead of just showing newspaper clippings, which all happens at the very end of the movie, which is weird because typically that happens in the second act, typically in horror movies, like at the end of the first, somewhere in the second act. And they waited till like the very end of the movie to start going through that. So all in all, I do like the movie. I would recommend people go watch it. I don't think it's a bad watch any means. And Ryan Reynolds, I think he does a pretty good job throughout this movie. Like, if you look at this movie compared to some of his newer movies, I would take this Ryan Reynolds any day of the week. Like, he feels more dynamic, and he's still able to bring some of that charisma, some of that comedic tone with him. And as far as the tone of the comedy with him, I think it's fine. I think it adds a little bit of levity to a very, very dark movie to begin with. It's just when the babysitter gets there, it shifts way too drastically in the over the top spectrum of movies. I thought they did a good job of kind of differentiating between the two different Georges. When he's outside the house, he's this loving, caring husband who is easygoing, comedic, sarcastic, witty, all these types of elements, right? But when he gets into the house, he becomes more angry, abusive, psychotic. He's hearing things. And what I thought they did really good with in that aspect is showcasing that, not necessarily with dialogue or character development, but how he actually looks. When he's in the house, that dude looks like pure dog shit. Like, they did a great job with makeup, and I know they had some type of like eye contacts in there to where it made his eyes more black, which I think is a nice little touch. It's simple. Sure, it's cheap, maybe a little cliche, but it is what it is. I think it adds a little bit extra depth to that character development, and really helps kind of, like I said, differentiate between the two types of Georges. And I think the only issue that I have with the movie, and Carmen will, if you're listening to this, you will absolutely 100% agree with me. I have an issue, and I don't need this in every single horror movie, okay? But it's a horror movie, okay? I don't need the good guys to win every single time. To me, this is the Amityville horror. People die in this fucking movie, okay? You have the husband, George, who is going crazy. When he is, you don't realize he's dreaming at the time, but when he goes and rears back the axe into the wife, I was like, oh shit. Like, bro, I kind of fucking forgot that this was even in the movie, and it ended up being a dream. I'm like, they should have led with that, man. They should have kept going with that aspect of the story, and I think that would have been a great ending. Because look, it's a horror movie. Evil is supposed to win, and I honestly, they take him out of the house, and it just abruptly ends at that. So I think it's a weak ending. I think it was kind of lazy, to be honest with you. So all those elements pieced together, I think you're looking at about a 2.5-star movie. It's enjoyable. It's something that you can watch. I would recommend going and watch it during October. This is a solid first entry into possession horror in review. So I'm not upset by watching this movie at all. It was definitely one of those things where I had fun. I was entertained, and it did everything that I wanted in a possession horror movie. Okay, it gave me the spookiness, it gave me the possession stuff, gave me a decent story. It just kind of falls flat in some of the aspects of the jump scares, being an actual horror movie and being scary, and then some of the world building and lore was kind of lazy in terms of writing. So 2.5 stars. It's on HBO Max. You can go check it out. Guys, that is going to be it for the first review for Horror in Review, Possession / Haunting in Review. So let me know in the comments below, whether you're on YouTube, whether you're on Spotify, whether you find us on Facebook. Let me know what you think about it. And do that whole like, subscribe, whatever you can to help support us. We would greatly appreciate that. And I gotta say, first video podcast out the way. It wasn't terrible, like in terms of me feeling anxious and having to stop it every 5 seconds. But I'd be curious to know how y'all think I did. Like, I feel like this is going to be one of those things where I'm going to have to practice this a lot more for sure. But I appreciate y'all joining me, and I appreciate all the support. And I will catch y'all next week on another review. Laters.